Our story begins in a quiet valley beneath the spires of a stone monastery, where a woman's body could be both salvation and ruin. Chapter 1: The Widow and the Bell. Her name was Iseult, and she walked barefoot in the grass behind the chapel each morning, her grey veil pressed to her head, her eyes always lowered. To the friars, she was a widow. To the villagers, she was a mystery. But to the bishop who ruled the valley from his tower above the church, she was temptation. It was the year of the famine. Fields had gone to rot. Boys had marched off to fight a king's war. And Iseult, young, shapely, quiet, had been left behind with no coin and no kin. To live, she turned to the only currency she had: herself. They said the bishop found her first in the cloister garden. The sun had just risen, and there she was, kneeling beside the herb beds, pulling mint leaves with long, careful fingers. She did not flinch when he stepped close. She only said, softly, "You tread like a man who hides." And he did. For even bishops in the Middle Ages were not safe from desire, but neither were they safe from scandal. So he took her not to his chambers, but to the ancient bell tower, high above the town. It was there, some whispered, that she knelt in the candlelight, and saved herself with silence. That bell tower had once been used to summon help. Now it summoned something else. For weeks, it was said, he returned to her each evening after Vespers, bringing bread, dried figs, the occasional linen cloth. In exchange, she gave him something no scribe could write. But in the Middle Ages, secrets could only be kept so long. One cold morning, the tower bell did not ring. The friars found the bishop collapsed at the foot of the stairs, his robes torn, his chest cut open with a blade stolen from the sacristy. Iseult was gone. So was the bread. And the figs. Some say she had been discovered and fled. Others say she slit him open and walked calmly down the road as the monks sang. Either way, what Iseult knew, the truth that stirred behind her eyes, was that in her century, a woman's body could be her last defense. If she gave it freely, she lived. If she withheld it, she died. And sometimes, if she used it well, she escaped. Breathe slowly now. The candle still flickers. The night is young, and there are more stories to tell. Let us move softly, gently, to another village, where another woman lived a life that danced on the blade of desire. Chapter 2: The Courtesan of the Port. Further south, where gulls circled over broken docks and barrels of saltfish baked in the sun, there lived a woman called Leon. She was not married, not noble, not meek, but she was clever. And in a world ruled by coin and clergy, Leon knew that lust could be a kind of currency, even safer than silver. She wore her hair loose in defiance of every bishop. Her lips were red when most women dared wear none. And she sat in the winehouse windows, reading poetry aloud while sailors leaned in with hungry eyes. But Leon didn't give herself freely. No. She chose her partners like a merchant chooses cargo. Wisely, and for gain. One night, a knight from Burgundy docked his ship, boasting of his lord and his sword and his hunger for wine. He drank 6 cups by her side. And as the stars spilled over the sea, Leon whispered a single word into his ear: confession. He blinked. She smiled. "If you wish to touch me," she said, "you must confess a secret first." And so he did. Drunk and smitten, he told her of his master's plan to poison a local duke at next week's feast. He told her of the hidden vial, the servant bribed, the route of escape. Leon listened, smiled, and as the knight slept soundly that night, thinking himself victorious in pleasure, she slipped away with his dagger, his coin pouch, and a written confession in her clever little hand. The next morning, the mayor of the port received a knock on his door. A note, a name, a plan unveiled. By nightfall, the knight was chained to a wall. The duke lived. And Leon? She was paid in gold and land. Yes. In the Middle Ages, some women were killed for love. Others survived by wielding it like a sword. And Leon? Leon built a life not through prayers, but through secrets extracted under the warm veil of seduction. The night deepens now. Let your limbs grow heavier. Feel the earth beneath you, anchoring you. Safe. And know that this is only the beginning. More stories wait in the shadows. Stories of queens and servants, of betrayal and rescue, of how, in those ancient centuries, the body was never just flesh. It was power. It was danger. It was freedom. The breeze has quieted now. Only a faint rustling of leaves remains. A moth taps gently against the windowpane, drawn to the lantern light. You are warm. You are safe. And our story now moves to a cloister of stone and silence, where the scent of beeswax and lavender fills the air, and where one woman's secret desire may have cost her soul. Chapter 3. The Nun Who Loved a Scribe. Her name was Sister Caitlina. She had taken her vows at 15, and for many years she wore her veil as though it were her skin. Her fingers copied sacred texts. Her voice hummed plain chant in the chapel by moonlight. And her heart belonged to no one, until he arrived. The abbey had hired him to illuminate a gospel, a wandering scribe named Thomas, with ink-stained hands and a voice like music spoken. He was not meant to look at her. He was not meant to speak. But in the scriptorium one afternoon, their eyes met over a page of golden lettering, and in that single glance, Sister Caitlina knew her soul would not survive the weeks to come untouched. Their meetings began with silence. A quill passed, a scroll shared. Then, whispers. What psalm was her favorite? Did she like the scent of rosemary more than lavender? Had she ever tasted honey warmed on bread? Each word was a thread, woven in secret. Each smile, a step toward a forbidden flame. One night, while the others slept, she crept from her chamber barefoot. The scriptorium was lit only by the dying embers of the hearth, and there he was, waiting. No kiss was shared, no scandal of flesh, but his hand reached out, trembling, and brushed the side of her face. And she leaned into it, as though her life had been waiting for that one gentle touch. It was enough, and it was everything. But sin, in those times, did not need proof, only suspicion. One of the elder sisters had seen her slip through the corridor at night. Within days, Caitlina was summoned to the Mother Superior's quarters. The questions were cold, the punishment colder still. Thomas was dismissed, sent to illuminate the margins of a lesser chapel in the north. And Caitlina? She was locked in the cloister's stone cell for a season. Only bread, only water, only silence. But she survived, and when spring returned, and she emerged again to chant in the chapel, her voice was steadier, her eyes calmer, for though the world had punished her, her body had held its truth, a memory, a warmth that not even stone could erase. So sleep now, if only for a breath, and imagine her kneeling beneath the stained glass, the colored light painting her hands, her cheeks, her lips. She was not ruined. She was not damned. She had felt. And in that century, that alone was power. Chapter 4. The Queen's Bargain. Now, let the candlelight shift once more, from the cloister to the castle, from whispered prayers to whispered commands. High above the peasants and parchment makers, behind velvet curtains and carved oak doors, lived a queen named Almoda, a queen not of birth, but of bargain. Almoda had been married at 16 to a man twice her age, a baron turned king through war and blood. She had been traded like land, wed to secure peace between rival houses. But Almoda was not the type to wilt in gold. Instead, she watched, she learned, and when the time came, she struck. The king had a bastard son. a threat to her crown. A boy born of a low-born laundress, hidden away in the southern courts, but growing older and bolder. Almoda needed allies. So she summoned Sir Vione, the captain of her guard, a man of rough hands and a weak oath. And one night, by the glow of rose-scented candles, she did not order him. She did not threaten. She simply undressed. To share her body was not surrender. It was strategy. For when Sir Vione awoke in her chamber, her lips near his ear, she whispered, "You belong to me now." And he did. Within weeks, the boy was gone. An accident, they said. A hunting trip that ended in grief. No questions asked. No bodies returned. And Almoda? She was crowned as Queen Regent before the king's illness took him 2 winters later. She ruled for a decade, and never took another man to her chambers again. Her touch had not been affection. It had been a deal. And in the Middle Ages, even queens made war without swords. Some with poisons, some with ink, and some with a single night of velvet and sighs. Breathe once more, dear listener, deeper this time. Feel the heaviness of your eyelids. Feel your breath slowing, your chest rising and falling like waves on a moonlit shore. Let these stories hold you like a blanket. Let their quiet truths wrap around your thoughts. For these are not tales of lust. These are tales of power, hidden beneath veils, beneath skin, beneath the ever-watchful eyes of priests, kings, and fate. The fire crackles low now, its warmth steady. Outside, a soft rain begins to fall, gentle, rhythmic, like a lullaby whispered to the earth. Let it soothe you, let it carry you to another chamber of the past. Chapter 5. The Midwife and the Unspoken. In a quiet hill village where roofs were thatched with straw and walls were daubed with mud and lime, lived a midwife named Marta. She was neither young nor old, neither feared nor fully trusted. But when a woman began to labor, it was Marta they called, and when a secret needed keeping, it was to Marta they whispered. Marta knew many things. Which herbs soothed fever, which teas brought bleeding, which roots could end a pregnancy, and which could make one begin. The church never asked. The lords turned their eyes, because even the holy knew that without midwives, entire villages would vanish by winter. One autumn, a noble girl came to Marta's door long after sunset. She was wrapped in a wool cloak too fine for the village paths. Her belly was swollen, her eyes filled with fear. She did not give her name. Marta did not ask. The girl begged for help. She offered coins, then jewels, then tears. But Marta only looked at her for a long moment before saying softly, "You will rest here. You will eat. You will speak of nothing." And so it was. For 3 weeks, the girl stayed hidden. Marta taught her how to breathe through pain, how to swaddle linen, how to boil lavender leaves to keep fever at bay. When the child came, quiet, with hair like ink, Marta wrapped it in wool and laid it by its mother's breast. The girl wept not from pain, but relief. And Marta? She held the silence like a sacrament. Before dawn the next morning, a black-cloaked rider came to the cottage. The girl handed him the child and said only, "Take him to the convent. Tell no one whose blood he carries." The rider nodded once and disappeared into the fog. As payment, the girl left Marta not gold, but protection, a small piece of parchment, sealed with the sigil of a high-born house. "If the church ever comes for you," she said, "show them this. My father will make them disappear." And with that, she was gone. Marta never used the paper. She never told the villagers. But from that night on, she was no longer just a midwife. She was the keeper of lives, and the guardian of truths too dangerous for men's ears. So if you ever find yourself in a dream of a medieval cottage, and a wise-eyed woman is tending a fire, stirring a dark-scented brew, do not be afraid. That is Marta, and she has saved more souls than any priest ever dared. Let your breath deepen now. The fire is lower, but still warm, still steady. We journey onward. Chapter 6. The Peasants' Pact. Down in the valley, where the fields turned gold in late summer and the river wove like a ribbon through the reeds, lived a peasant named Tilo. He was quiet, broad-shouldered, alone. He had once been in love with a girl who laughed like water spilling into a basin. But that girl had married another, and Tilo, heart-bruised, had said nothing. Years passed. The crops were good, then bad, then good again. But Tilo remained alone, until the plague came. It swept through the village in silence. No trumpets, no warnings, just blackened lips, fevered skin, and stillness. Within a week, half the village was gone, and the girl Tilo had once loved, she lay coughing in a straw bed beside the corpse of her husband. Tilo tended her. He brought water. He gathered herbs. He sat beside her as the fever rose and fell, and when she survived, when her eyes opened again to the light, she whispered, "You saved me." She was a widow now, a mother of two, alone, afraid, worn down to her bones. And Tilo, he asked for nothing, only that she not be afraid of him. Over time, she smiled again. She brushed his arm once when they gathered onions. She laughed when he spilled grain into the river by accident. And one night, as the stars hung heavy above the barn roof, she stepped toward him, and he did not move. There was no ceremony, no priest, no witness, just two people, too bruised by the world to speak aloud what they needed, but who found it anyway, in one another. Their union was not recognized by the church. It was not written into any book, but in their village they were man and wife. Their children grew strong, their fields grew rich, and though the law might call it sin, the truth was clear. Love had saved them, touch had brought them back from the edge, and in that time, that place, survival was holiness enough. Now breathe once more. The rain has faded to mist. The fields of the past stretch wide and golden before you, and so many stories remain. Stories of tavern girls and duchesses, of betrayal and survival, of the human need to be held, even when it costs everything. The candlelight flickers gently on the beams above you. Somewhere in the distance, a wooden wind chime knocks softly in the night breeze. The scent of old leather, warm bread, and drying herbs clings to the air, a reminder that the world we travel through tonight is ancient and very human. We return now to a crooked alley of flagstones and spilled wine, where a tavern girl once played a game that saved her life. Chapter 7. The Tavern Girl's Gambit. Her name was Lisette, though she'd been called many things. Wench, Devil's Daughter, Beauty with a Blade. She served beer in a portside tavern where the walls sweated and the laughter smelled of ale. She wore her skirts high, her laces low, and never smiled unless she meant to. But Lisette had a secret most missed. She could read. No one asked how a tavern girl came to understand Latin inscriptions or royal seals. She let them assume it was magic or madness. But in truth, her father had once been a monk, before he lost himself in drink and dice and found her mother in a brothel. By age 10, Lisette could read better than most priests. By 20, she knew how to use it. One night, a foreign merchant came to the tavern. Tall, gold-braided, sharp with a tongue not native to the coast. He ordered wine, then meat, then Lisette. She smiled, but asked a price. "You want me," she said. "You write it down, in your own hand." Confused but intrigued, the man wrote his name on a folded scrap, sealed with his signet ring. Lisette kept it. The night passed as such nights did. Moans behind curtains. Coins on the pillow. Another man with too much power and too little soul. But days later, Lisette visited a notary on the edge of the merchant quarter. She presented the letter. It bore the seal of a man wanted by the crown, for treason and theft of royal property. The notary's hands trembled. Lisette simply asked for a reward, and a horse. By sunset, the merchant was chained to a cart. Lisette was gone, riding east, free of the tavern, free of her past. They would later say she was wicked, that she used her body to trap him, that she was unnatural. But those who knew better. She had not used her body. She had used her mind. Her body was simply the stage on which she set her trap. So sleep, soft traveller, and dream of the tavern's glow, the clink of copper cups, the whisper of silk skirts in motion. For even in the roughest of places, wit and will could still mean survival. Now we drift, deeper still, to a chapel where no prayers were heard, and a priest wrestled not with the devil, but with desire. Chapter 8. The priest with no name. He never gave his true name, not to the congregation, not to the bishop who sent him, not even to the girl he loved. They called him Father Corwin, though that was not his birth name. He had come to the edge of the forest, to a crumbling stone chapel once burned in a war. Its roof was patched with moss, its pews gnawed by mice. But the villagers welcomed him, for they had long lived without sacraments or confession. Among them was a healer named Anais. Her hands were darkened by herbs and smoke. She never entered the chapel. She believed in roots, not relics. But when Father Corwin fell ill, she was the one who nursed him. Their time together was wordless. Cool cloths pressed to fevered skin, whispers between breaths, fingers that lingered too long over cups and bandages. When he recovered, he thanked her, and then he kissed her. It was not lust, not power, not even longing. It was need, simple, human, trembling need, to be touched, to be seen. For though he wore the robes of a priest, inside he was still a man, still bruised by solitude, still raw from penance he never chose. They met once a week, deep in the woods. No altar, no vows, only moss and light, and hands that found one another as if by prayer. He never confessed it, not to God, not to Anais, but she knew. And when soldiers came, searching for witches, for heretics, for midwives and moon women, Anais was the one who told him to run. She stayed. He vanished. Some said he returned to the abbey, others that he died in a war. But Anais never wept. She had not lost him. She had known him, if only for a season, and for some in the Middle Ages, that was more than many ever received. Let that settle in your chest like warm bread. Let the silence wrap around your breath like linen. Even the priests were not untouched. Even the women in mossy huts had lovers, and every night someone somewhere made a choice to risk everything
for a moment of closeness. Now we travel again, through time, through mist, through the hush of history's long corridors. Can you hear the steady rhythm of hooves on wet earth? Can you picture a woman wrapped in dust and cloth, moving through lands not her own? She is not royalty, not holy, not free, but she knows the value of what she carries beneath her cloak. Chapter 9. The Pilgrim's Deal. Her name was Ismena. She walked from Avignon to Canterbury, a journey of saints and sinners. A pilgrim, they called her, though some doubted her cause. She did not wear a rosary. She did not speak Latin. She had no relic to offer at the shrine, but she walked day after day, dirt crusted beneath her nails, eyes focused on a place far from the one she left. No one asked what she fled. One night, near the English border, she came to a toll station where armed men guarded a stone bridge. They stopped her, searched her bag, laughed at her worn shoes and broken brooch. Then one of them stepped close, too close. "Prayers don't pay tolls," he said, "and women like you pay otherwise." Ismena said nothing, but her eyes did not flinch. She reached into her cloak, not for a weapon, but for a velvet pouch. Inside were 2 glass vials, sealed tight with wax. "Saint's water," she lied. "Holy, rare, worth more than gold." The men hesitated. "Drink it if you like," she added softly, "but only if you wish to wake tomorrow without your skin." She had seen it before, this fear of curses, of witches, of invisible wrath, and she wielded it like a sword forged of nothing but belief. The captain grunted. Let her pass. And when she crossed the bridge, into the wild unknown of northern lands, she did not smile. She did not pray. She simply walked on. Some say the vials held wine, others river water and ash. But in that world, mystery was as strong as steel, and a woman's whispered promise of danger could stop a man faster than any blade. So breathe now. Breathe in slow. And out. Feel your chest rise and fall like waves on the sea, for there are more tales waiting, and the next is one that still haunts old towns by the sea. Chapter 10. The Bride Who Vanished. In the town of Eldmere, where cliffs crumble into grey waters and gulls scream over the tides, there is a tale that the locals speak only in hushed tones. They call her Branwen. She was to marry a merchant's son, a boy with fine boots and little wit. The banns had been read, the dresses sewn, the feast prepared. But Branwen, they said, never smiled. Not once, not even when she chose the lace for her veil. She had grown up with sea salt in her lungs and calluses on her palms. She loved the water, not the market, and while the town gossiped of embroidery and dower chests, Branwen was watching the stranger. He arrived on a northern ship, tall, dark-cloaked, silent. A merchant, he claimed, but others whispered he was something else. Something wrong. Branwen did not flinch from him. She passed him a glance one morning as she bought lemons at the quay. He returned it with a nod, not a smile, not a leer, just recognition. Days passed. The wedding neared, and one night, as the moon dripped silver over the waves, Branwen was gone. Her veil remained, her shoes, but not Branwen. Some said she drowned, others said she was taken, but a dockhand's daughter later swore she saw her, wrapped in foreign silks, aboard the northern ship, sailing away with the silent man. Years later, a letter arrived. No address, only a pressed wildflower, and the words, "I was never yours to marry. I am mine." They say her father wept for weeks. that the groom drank himself into ruin, that the town cursed her name. But the sea remembers her smile. And the wind still carries her laughter when the tide is low. In that world, in that time, to choose your own life, even at the price of shame, was the boldest kind of survival. And Branwen, bold as the ocean, chose herself. Now sink deeper. Let your spine grow heavy. Let your thoughts soften like worn linen beneath your head. The night continues. The past breathes beside us. And we have only begun to explore the ways bodies became both cages and keys. Soft winds combed through the linen curtains of the Queen's solar, where thin strips of golden light lay across the tiled floor like sleeping cats. Outside, the palace garden murmured with bees and swaying lavender, but within, the room was hushed, cool, and scented faintly with rosemary and dried rose petals. A fire snapped gently in the hearth despite the summer heat. It wasn't for warmth, but for ritual. The Queen believed in the power of fire to burn away illness, to chase away evil humors, and to bring clarity to the mind. And she needed clarity now more than ever. For months, her body had grown quieter. No blood, no quickening signs. The king grew suspicious. The court watched with whispering eyes. And yet the Queen had never been more careful. She had prayed, fasted, drank the brews of midwives, and kept her husband close on holy nights. But the cradle in the corner of her chamber remained empty. The pressure of succession was unbearable. A queen's value, as the realm whispered, lay in her womb. And so, a physician was summoned, not the castle's usual leech, but a man whose reputation passed from noblewoman to noblewoman like a secret. He arrived quietly at night, dressed not in black robes, but in fine wool, his satchel heavy with herbs, manuscripts, and strange powders from the East. His name was Master Tomos, a learned Czech who trained in Salerno and spoke as gently as a priest but saw through people like glass. When he entered the Queen's chamber, she expected cold hands and clinical stares. But instead, he bowed low, kissed the hem of her gown, and asked if he might sit beside her as a companion, not a judge. She allowed it. "Your Grace," he began, his voice low and smooth, "the body is not an enemy. It's a messenger. May I listen?" She nodded, breath caught in her throat. He asked questions no other man dared ask, not about blood or pain, but about dreams, sorrows, even music. He inquired about her nights, when she felt most alive, when desire kindled in her and when it fled. He asked her not to speak of the king, but of herself, as a woman, not a queen. Night after night, he returned with soft eyes and tinctures that calmed her belly. He taught her to breathe deeply, to lie still with rose quartz under her tongue, and to whisper wishes into her pillow. He mixed salves with crushed opals and mugwort, rubbed them gently over her feet and the pulse points of her neck. At first, the ladies whispered about witchcraft. Then, they noticed her skin grow flush with colour, her laughter returning to the halls. The Queen, who had grown cold and unreachable, now smiled at chambermaids and hummed in the mornings. The king noticed, too. One evening, Master Tomos warned her gently, "Desire is healing, Majesty, but too much of it, misdirected, can turn even a queen to ash." The Queen met his gaze, steady as the moon. "Then I shall balance on the edge." And so she did. She lay with her husband not out of duty, but as a queen who understood her body anew. She wrapped herself in silk and honey, drank pomegranate wine before their meetings, and whispered foreign words in his ear. The king, bewildered and entranced, returned to her nightly. Weeks later, the Queen bled red as pomegranates and feared the worst, but Master Tomos only smiled. "A seed needs cleansing soil," he said. "This is good." By harvest season, her belly rounded gently. Midwives rejoiced. The court bowed lower, and Master Tomos vanished as quietly as he had come, leaving behind a single note. In desire lies death, but in knowing desire there lies life. The queen never spoke his name again, but she passed on his teachings, not as royal command, but as quiet wisdom to her daughters and their handmaids. They too would learn that in the Middle Ages a woman's power did not lie solely in obedience, but in knowing her body, her hunger, and the secret alchemy between touch, timing, and trust. The cradle no longer stood empty, and within the stillness of the castle halls, her child, born beneath the winter moon, would one day inherit not only the crown, but the whispered law of survival that only women knew. Outside, the bees still danced among the lavender, and inside, another fire was lit. Let your body rest, your breath slow, and the quiet hush of evening surround you like a soft blanket. The flicker of candlelight still dances behind your closed eyelids. The sound of distant hooves, the clink of a chainmail belt, and the whisper of linen skirts brushing across stone floors drift in and out of your imagination, each one pulling you deeper, ever deeper, into a forgotten world. Our story continues now, with a woman known only to a few scrolls and whispered legends. She was called Mariel of Languedoc, a midwife by trade, but something else too, something dangerous in a world shaped by suspicion. In her small cottage outside Carcassonne, Mariel kept herbs drying from every rafter. Pennyroyal, rue, mugwort, and locked behind her wooden cupboard, silphium, though it was nearly extinct. These herbs were not for stew, nor for salve. They were for secrets. You see, in the Middle Ages, it wasn't just a child's life at stake during birth. It was the mother's, the midwife's, and sometimes the village's peace. A woman's body could be the battleground for mercy or murder. And Mariel, she had helped too many women avoid what the church called God's plan. There were whispers, always, that she had ways of knowing things, that no woman in the valley had more than 2 children, thanks to her, that she'd once helped the bishop's maid, who had returned from a summer in the mountains very pale and very silent. What the townsfolk didn't see, however, was how many lives she saved. The girl on her wedding night, terrified and bruised, the widow pregnant by force, the young wife with 5 children and a belly that could not stretch any further. But salvation has its price, and in a time where S3X was considered sacred when fruitful, and sinful when free, Mariel was walking on thin ice every day of her life. One evening, as snow melted in spring's earliest sigh, Mariel was summoned to the manor house of Lord Emmerich. His daughter, barely 16, was pale and trembling in her linen shift. The Lord's eyes didn't meet hers. "She is sick," he said simply. "You'll fix it." But Mariel knew what she was seeing. The faint swelling, the glassy eyes, the pulse of fear beating beneath the girl's neck. Someone had taken her innocence, and her father did not want it known. If Mariel succeeded in ending this secret quietly, the girl would survive, and no scandal would breach the stone walls of the keep. If she failed, or if anyone found out, the next day the priest came knocking at her door. He came with men in dark cloaks and a scroll that spoke of heresy and unnatural knowledge. But the girl had lived. Mariel had risked her own safety, and disappeared into the forests that very night. Her house was burned, her name scrubbed from records. Yet, in the neighboring towns, her legend bloomed. Herbs passed from one hand to another. Recipes whispered like lullabies in the dark. A whole network of women helping one another survive, using the body not as a weapon, but as a shield. And yet, in other corners of the world, S3X wasn't a shield. It was the blade. Let us drift now to the Isle of Man, where a noblewoman named Briga used her beauty for something much colder than love. She had been married off at 15 to a man twice her age, a knight with lands and horses and no heart. Briga endured his cruelty for a decade, bearing no children, always smiling when spoken to, always quiet when dismissed. But Briga had watched, had learned. She saw how men sat back with open mouths when she walked into a room, veiled just enough to tempt. How their hands tightened on goblets when she touched her braid. How they imagined she was meek, simple, like a lamb ready for slaughter. And one day, when her husband insulted a visiting duke, Briga made her move. The duke was married, pious, a man of law. But one glance at Briga's honeyed eyes, and he was a fool. Their affair was quick, hidden, and precise. The next spring, the knight fell from his horse, and did not rise. Some said he'd drunk too much, some said the saddle strap had frayed. But a page boy told a different tale, that he'd seen the Duchess walking the stables at dawn, fingering the girth strap, that she smiled as the knight rode off, that she'd whispered something to the stablemaster, just before he disappeared from the estate. Within a year, Briga was betrothed again, to a man richer than the first, and within 3, she was widowed again, this time inheriting land and title. She had become a baroness through nothing but lace, scent, and cold calculation. In her case, sex did not save, nor did it kill with blood. It was strategy, silent, glittering strategy, and many feared her more than any man with a sword. So you see, dear listener, in this time of castles and cloisters, of ink and iron, sex was never just about love. It was rarely about pleasure. More often, it was about power. To withhold it was defiance. To use it could be survival, and to fall victim to it could mean death by shame, exile, or silence. You may feel the weight of that now. Let it settle into your thoughts like a fog across a medieval moor. There were no easy choices, no safe havens, just candles flickering in 1,000 cottages, and women and men both, asking quietly into the night, "How do I live another day?" Let your mind float now, as if on a quiet current beneath soft candlelight. You're safe here. Your thoughts are light, untethered, drifting. Each breath you take draws you deeper into the warmth of this world. Inhale the smell of beeswax and lavender, and hear the soft scratch of woolen skirts brushing over flagstone floors. Let us slip, without haste, into the hush of another tale. Our story tonight sets itself beside a narrow alleyway in a walled medieval town, a place where secrets are traded not in coin, but in confidence, where moonlight spills across tiled rooftops, and the only sound at this hour is the hush of a woman's voice behind shuttered windows. She is called Anselma, a midwife, a healer, a guardian of knowledge both sacred and scandalous. In the dim light of her chamber, lined with tinctures and dried herbs hanging like little secrets from the ceiling beams, she prepares to attend another birth, or perhaps another concealment. In the Middle Ages, the figure of the midwife stood dangerously close to both salvation and death. She could deliver life, or prevent it. She could save a noble family from shame, or lead a peasant girl to a quiet grave. Her fingers, so practiced and steady, held the power that frightened men whispered about in alehouses, that women feared and needed. Tonight, Anselma moves through her duties in silence, wrapping a bundle of cloth around warm stones for a labouring woman. But her thoughts drift backward, to another night, another cry in the dark. A young noblewoman had come to her in secret, belly full, heart shattered, pleading for mercy. The man who had promised her marriage had ridden off to war without a word. His child grew inside her like a ticking bell. The woman's name had been Isabeau. Her eyes were green as crushed mint, her wrists delicate as breadsticks, her fear palpable. She had knelt before Anselma and begged for the herbs that might end what had begun, and Anselma had said no. Instead, she had hidden Isabeau in her cellar, brought her soup laced with poppy and honey, rubbed her swollen ankles with oil of rose. She'd told her stories to make her laugh, told her truths to make her brave. When the baby came, one stormy night beneath flickering candlelight, it had arrived silently, not dead, not crying, simply watching. A girl. Anselma had cradled the child in one hand and Isabeau's trembling fingers in the other. "This child," she whispered, "may one day have a name that saves your family, or she may walk into the world and burn it down. Either way, she will not be hidden." And so, Isabeau had named her Marie, and raised her far from court, in a fishing village where no one asked whose blood ran in her veins. Years later, Marie would take to the sea, dressed as a man, carrying both a dagger and a book of herbal wisdom Anselma had gifted her. But that, dear listener, is another tale. Back in the warm chamber, Anselma adds sage leaves to a simmering pot. The scent curls into the rafters like a secret. The laboring woman in the bed groans softly, her hands clutching at wool. She's young, barely more than a girl. And her lover, a merchant's son, now vanished, his cart of wine casks trundled to another town. This child will be born into quiet poverty, but not into shame. Anselma will see to that. She will write a name on a scrap of parchment, fold it 3 times, and tuck it into the child's swaddling. She will say the name aloud only once, "To the stars," and she will hold this mother through the tremors, mop her brow, and press honeyed wine to her lips. In this time and place, sex was not merely pleasure, nor always punishment. It was a game of timing, of alliances, of accidents, of choices, when choices were dangerous. For the midwife, sex was survival. For others, and sometimes for herself, there were whispers that Anselma had once been a nun, that she had fled a convent with a lover, that the lover was a priest, or a count, or a thief, or all 3. No one knew, but no one questioned her when she walked the market square in her red cloak, the sign of her calling. She was power cloaked in kindness, and many feared that. The church had tried, more than once, to strip midwives of their herbs, their knowledge, their influence, accusing them of witchcraft, of interfering with God's will. But Anselma had survived it all. She never wrote her recipes down, only passed them from mouth to mouth, woman to woman, as they braided hair or stirred porridge. That was how wisdom endured, quietly, and when women came to her door at dusk, with their heads bowed low, she opened the door. Always. She would take their hand, offer tea with dried hawthorn, and ask, "Do you wish to begin, or to end?" Some chose life, some chose otherwise, but all left with a name, written on paper, or whispered in darkness, a name that gave weight to what they had carried, what they had done, what they had lost. And still, the wind curls around the chimney outside. The fire in the hearth crackles softly, casting shadows across Anselma's weathered face. The groans of labor grow deeper, closer, and in the next breath, a cry pierces the room. A child is born. Anselma places the baby on the mother's chest, wraps them both in blankets, and kisses the child's brow. "You will be seen," she murmurs. Then she cleans her tools. She stokes the fire. She pours a cup of broth. And she whispers a prayer, not to saints or angels, but to the long line of women who had taught her everything she knows. For in this world, where sex could either save or destroy, midwives like Anselma walk the narrow line between them both, steady as a lantern in a storm. And outside, the town sleeps, the stars above, do not judge. They only watch.
Let your breathing fall into rhythm again, my dear listener. The fire is still warm, and the wind still sighs at the shutters. We return now to the velvet dark world of the Middle Ages, where passion could shield or destroy, and a single glance could change the fate of a kingdom. Our story continues in a narrow stone tower overlooking a bend in the Loire River. Inside, Lady Isabeau, favoured handmaiden to the Duchess of Angoulême, clutched a small bundle wrapped in linen. Inside it lay her future, a note sealed with wax and the Duke's private crest, and a dagger no longer than her hand. The Duke, her mistress's husband, had summoned Isabeau secretly 3 nights ago, under moonlight, through the west servants' gate. He had not touched her, but what he said burned like fire through her mind even now. "My wife is barren," he whispered, his voice trembling with a kind of fury restrained. "The king will never grant my land to a woman who cannot carry an heir. But you, Isabeau, I've seen you near the orchards. You are strong. You bloom." He offered her no affection, only a proposition, cloaked in silk: give him a son, and he would grant her protection. A dowry. Land. Isabeau had wept after returning to her chamber that night, overwhelmed by the impossible choice. In their world, women without status had no shield but cunning, and even that wore thin. She could risk disgrace and ruin if discovered. But if she succeeded, she might wield more power than a duchess. She was not the first, nor would she be the last, to hold such a blade of decision in her hands. The medieval world rarely saw women as wielders of political power, and yet many influenced history by what happened behind closed doors, in secret chambers and silk-covered beds. A child born of seduction could inherit land, or war, and those who carried the child often bore the consequence of both. In Bohemia, the concubine of a merchant was gifted the deed to half his vineyards after she bore him a healthy son. But when his wife poisoned her with herbs soaked in vinegar and honey, the boy was cast out. He returned, years later, with fire and soldiers behind him, claiming blood over ink. Even in cloisters, places we imagine quiet and serene, desire found its way between pages of prayer books. Nuns, bound by vows, sometimes became lovers to powerful abbots or knights who promised protection for their convents. And if a child resulted, it was often smuggled away under the veil of pilgrimage or illness. But not all who played the game of pleasure did so willingly. Let us drift, now, to a colder corner of the continent, to a high stone keep in Scotland, where a woman named Morag was taken as war prize by a rival clan chief. They say Morag never wept. Not once, even as her hair was shorn and her name forbidden. She watched. She listened. For 9 long moons, she carried the chief's child, and never once looked him in the eye. When the boy was born, she named him Adhan and refused to speak the tongue of her captors. It was said that when the boy grew strong, Morag whispered to him each night by the fire, teaching him her clan's stories, names, and vengeance. At 16, Adhan turned on the very man who sired him, and reclaimed his mother's birthright with the sword. Through her womb, Morag brought not just life, but retribution. In these stories, dear one, we begin to see how sex was not merely pleasure, or shame, or power. It was a double-edged blade. Sometimes, the very thing that broke a woman became the seed of her survival. Isabeau, in her stone tower, sat now before a cracked mirror. She brushed her dark hair slowly, thinking of the note hidden in her cloak. It said only, "Come to the east wing after night prayers. No lamps. Wear silence." She did not know if she would go, but she knew the choice would mark her life, whether she obeyed, refused, or rewrote the rules altogether. Outside, the bells of Vespers began to toll, echoing across the rooftops and down into the river valley. It was time. She rose, and with her, so too did the next twist in the long, tangled tale of how love, desire, and danger became one thread in the fabric of the Middle Ages. A thread that, if pulled too hard, could unravel everything.
Let the world fall away for now. Let your breathing deepen. The night grows softer, quieter. Outside your window, the wind caresses the grass, a timeless lullaby whispered by the earth itself. You are safe here, resting in the folds of history, gently wrapped in candlelight and the warmth of a story. Our tale tonight drifts into a chapter where desire could become divine, or deadly. It begins in a quiet corner of medieval Spain, in a time when Christian, Muslim, and Jewish knowledge coexisted in tense harmony. Here, among the cobbled alleyways and tiled roofs of Córdoba, a woman named Solina practiced an ancient art not recognized by the church, but sought after by those who believed in healing through touch and through love. Solina was what some might now call a healer, others a heretic. She studied texts smuggled from the East, scrolls from Arabic physicians, whispers from lost Greek scholars, and veiled hints found in the Song of Songs. Her chamber was scented with lavender and rosewood. Her fingers, soft and practiced, traced lines across the skin not in lust, but in ritual. She believed that the human body, when touched with reverence and knowledge, could release sickness, that passion, when sacred, could drive out rot from within. And so, when noblemen fell ill with melancholia, when women lost the will to live after childbirth, when war-hardened knights returned broken in soul, they did not go to the church first. They went to her. There was no sin in her room, only silence, oils warmed by flame, and slow movement. But such ideas frightened those in power. The idea that a woman could heal with the same hands that stirred longing, the same breath that coaxed tears and laughter from the body. It was too much. And so, while she healed in secret, others whispered her ruin. One night, a priest-inquisitor visited Solina in disguise, not as a man of God, but as a man of pain. His body was riddled with tremors. His sleep haunted. Solina saw it all in his eyes before he even spoke. She did not undress him with force, but with reverence, not to shame or seduce, but to let the sickness go. She murmured over him softly, not prayers of Latin, but breathy invocations of life. You are more than what they made of you. You are not alone in your suffering. And when dawn came, he wept, for he had not felt clean in years. He left, and the rumors about her quieted for a time. But still, the threat loomed, because in the Middle Ages, healing through sensuality was more terrifying than poison. Now we drift across the sea, over the glittering waters of the Adriatic, into Venice, the city of masks, the city of secret deals and even more secret deaths. In Venice, sex was both mask and weapon, both escape and execution. Courtesans here were trained not just in seduction, but in statecraft. They memorized the movements of generals, the gossip of bishops, the debts of princes. The most elite among them were known as honest courtesans, paradoxical, yet perfectly Venetian. These women, dressed in pearls and perfume, could recite Virgil in the morning, and uncover a state secret by nightfall. One such courtesan, called Lucia del Mare, was born the daughter of a baker. But her beauty caught the eye of a retired actress, who trained her in voice, in poise, in the art of holding a man's gaze until he forgot the names of his children. Lucia was no fool. She knew that a single wrong glance could lead to drowning in the canals. She danced through palaces on slippered feet, each gesture measured, each smile loaded with meaning. The Doge himself invited her to feasts, claiming it was for entertainment. But in truth, she knew which ambassador had lied, which general had a mistress with ties to Florence, which counselor owed more than he could repay, and she used it, not to destroy, but to protect those she loved. When plague returned to the city, she bribed a naval officer to smuggle medicine into the poorest wards. When her sister was accused of theft by a jealous merchant, Lucia seduced the judge, then ensured his confessions were read aloud by a choir boy, masked at carnival. Venice rewarded her in coin and perfume, and threatened her in silence, because if the wrong man fell too deeply under her spell, if the wrong wife whispered too loudly, she could be dead by dawn. And yet, she lived on, her legend written not in books, but in sighs passed along balconies, in secret toasts made on gondolas that cut through the moonlight. Both Solina and Lucia used desire as a scalpel, not a sword. One healed through touch, the other through influence. but both walked the knife's edge, where one wrong breath could become a death sentence. This is the paradox of the Middle Ages. Sex could save a man from despair, or damn a woman to fire. Now, let the story settle like dusk across your thoughts. Inhale softly, and exhale any tension. The world is distant now. You're safe in the folds of time, where none of these dangers can follow. You're floating beneath candlelight, where silk brushes your skin and time forgets your name. The next part of our story will take us even deeper. It will tell of queens who weaponized motherhood, and poisoners who kissed their victims with honeyed lips. But for now, rest in the quiet after. Our story drifts onward now, into another flickering firelit hall, a place where alliances were never quite what they seemed, where sex, marriage, and whispered promises held the weight of daggers in the dark. Let us walk into the stone shadows of a royal court, a place not ruled by the sword alone, but by bedroom intrigues. The court of Castile, 13th century. Austere stone pillars held up the soaring ceilings of King Alfonso's winter palace. Heavy tapestries muffled the winds that curled in from the Pyrenees. Wax candles burned low, dripping like slow tears onto iron sconces. And beneath them, the world of velvet gowns and secret glances thrived. In the Middle Ages, queens and noblewomen weren't just ornaments of beauty or mothers of heirs. They were often the most powerful weapons in a kingdom's arsenal. Sex, in the hands of a queen, could sway the tides of war, or seal a nation's doom. Dona Berenguela of Castile understood this better than most. She had been queen, then regent, then queen mother, a woman who danced in and out of power like a shadow behind the throne. And every decision she made, every alliance, every marriage arranged for her children, was calculated to protect her lineage. She knew that a single poorly chosen union could unravel her family's claim, that to marry a son or daughter was not merely to join hands, but to light a match on a pile of political kindling. And so, when her son Ferdinand, later known as Ferdinand the Saint, came of age, she searched for not only a beautiful bride, but one whose body and womb might protect the realm. The chosen bride was Elizabeth of Hohenstaufen, a German noblewoman with imperial blood. The match was not of affection or romance, but of strategy. Their wedding night was more than a celebration of love. It was a binding treaty between kingdoms. In candlelit bedchambers all across Europe, such alliances played out in silk and secrecy. Sometimes the participants barely spoke the same language. Sometimes they had never met before the nuptials. But from that moment onward, their bodies were not their own. To refuse one's husband or wife was to risk war, insult, or annulment. And here, the line between sex as salvation and sex as danger became blurred. Imagine a young noblewoman, barely 16, wrapped in linen sheets, her hair combed with rosemary water, her wrists perfumed with crushed herbs. She has just crossed a sea to marry a man twice her age. She doesn't know his customs, his temper, or the language of his court. Her wedding night is both a duty and a battlefield. If she pleases him, she may live a life of quiet protection, surrounded by ladies, gardens, and books. If she angers him, if she fails to produce a child, or whispers the wrong thing, her fate might be a nunnery, or worse. In England, during the late 1100s, Eleanor of Aquitaine wielded sexual diplomacy with fierce precision. A woman of wit and education, she had once been Queen of France, and then Queen of England. She arranged the marriages of her sons and daughters with the poise of a master tactician. But even Eleanor knew that once her children were wed, their bodies, and their fates, were subject to the whims of the courts they entered. Her daughter, Joanna, was married off to the King of Sicily. On the surface, it was a fine match, uniting England with a Mediterranean stronghold. But within weeks of the wedding, whispers emerged that the king refused to touch her, that he claimed she brought foreign devils into his home. She was imprisoned in a tower until her brother, Richard the Lionheart, arrived and demanded her release. In this, sex had not saved her. It had endangered her. Yet Eleanor still pressed forward, arranging more marriages, building her dynasty, because the only way to secure power for a woman was to wield sexuality as a tool of survival. And for the lower classes, sex could be both a blessing and a curse, sometimes in the same breath. A peasant woman might be spared hunger by becoming the mistress of a knight or a reeve. But the moment she became pregnant, the balance of power shifted. If she bore a son, she might gain favor, maybe even a small cottage or protection for her family. If not, she could be cast aside, shamed, or worse, accused of tempting a man of higher birth, which in many areas could be punishable by public flogging. And yet, some women leaned into this danger. They learned the language of seduction, not out of vanity, but out of necessity. A flick of the eyes, a hand brushed against fabric, a whispered tale at the market. These were survival skills. A child born out of wedlock could ruin a woman's name. But it could also tie her to a more powerful man, binding her to him in ways that gave her shelter when winter came. One such tale drifts to us from the misty edges of a forest village in Bohemia. A young woman named Leda worked as a brewer's apprentice. She was plain in looks, but sharp in mind, and she watched the men of the village not with lust, but calculation. When the Lord's son began visiting the brewery to inspect the barrels, she understood what he was seeking. Rather than resist or submit blindly, she negotiated, gently, softly. She asked not for gifts, but for promises, for warmth for her aging father, for oats during lean months. She never married him, but she bore his child, and she lived a life more comfortable than most peasants, because she turned sex into currency, not for wealth, but for stability. But others were not so fortunate. In France, a law known as droit du seigneur, the so-called right of the first night, was rumored to give lords the right to sleep with a serf's bride before her husband could. Historians still debate whether this was ever truly enforced. But the fear was real enough. Folk songs, village prayers, and even carved illustrations in the margins of monastic books hinted at the terror young couples felt on their wedding nights. To make love could be to invite violence, and yet it was also a path to freedom. A woman who seduced the right man could change her entire lineage. A knight who married a merchant's daughter, captivated by her wit or charm, could elevate her to nobility. Sex in the Middle Ages was never just about passion. It was war by other means, and the battlefield was lined with rose petals, perfumes, and peril. So now, dear listener, as our story folds deeper into velvet shadows and flickering dreams, let the glow of these tales warm your thoughts. Imagine the rustle of silk across stone floors, the hush of breath beneath carved bedposts, the gentle creak of timbers in the night. Let the rise and fall of these ancient dramas cradle you like waves on an old wooden boat. Breathe softly now, and feel yourself drifting deeper. Shoo! Let the night draw closer still. Let the warmth of an unseen fire pulse gently through your limbs, as if you're nestled by the stone hearth of a quiet medieval inn. The windows are fogged, and the wind outside brushes the shutters like a whisper too shy to speak. Every sound is softened now, even your thoughts. You are safe. You are calm. And we're still walking through the centuries. Gently, with reverence, our story tonight drifts now into a shadowed city of Florence. It was the 13th century, and behind the silks and churches, behind the scrolls of theology and the laws of trade, something else was always stirring. In Florence, like in much of Europe, the ties of sex and vengeance were so tightly bound they could strangle or save, depending on who held the knot. In this chapter, we peer through a veil of lace into the world of seduction as assassination. It began as many such tales do, with a widow, a woman named Maddalena degli Albizzi. She wore black, not for modesty, but as armor. Her husband had been murdered, a political killing, as so many were then, when Florence was torn between noble families, between Guelphs and Ghibellines. Her husband's death was chalked up to city affairs. But Maddalena knew, and she did not forget. In those days, women were seen as tools in such feuds, married off, used to build alliances or dilute rival bloodlines. But Maddalena, she understood the game, and flipped the board. Her revenge began slowly, like a drop of oil on parchment. One whispered confession, one tilt of the head in the candlelight, one invitation passed beneath a linen napkin at a feast, and soon she had seduced the brother of her husband's killer. It wasn't love. It wasn't lust. It was leverage. In bed, behind closed curtains, she did not speak of grief. She kissed away the questions and let her lover believe she was healed. But her mind was sharpening. In whispered moments, she let slip certain secrets, about land deals, about rival loyalties, about a bishop who might change sides. She knew what to say and what to withhold. She let him feel as though he was the clever one, the manipulator, and slowly, like a spider weaving silk through silence, she bound him to her. By the time she was ready to strike, the man was hers in every way, and when his family fell, swept in an avalanche of accusation and exile, Maddalena never raised her voice. She only adjusted her veil. Sex, in this world, was never simple. It was not merely flesh or pleasure. It was strategy, a game played not only with bodies, but with tongues, silvered, forked, or sealed in silence. And not only women played it. Let us drift further north now, into Burgundy, where a monk named Brother Gerard faced his own temptation, not from a courtesan or a noblewoman, but from within his own soul. He had taken vows of celibacy, of poverty, of silence. But in the spring of his 32nd year, a young boy arrived at the monastery for refuge, a boy with golden hair and haunted eyes, a boy who had fled war and who looked to Gerard as if he were salvation. Their bond, at first, was pure, innocent, a comfort shared in prayer and in shared bread. But temptation, in medieval theology, did not always arrive wearing red or whispering in candlelight. Sometimes it came with kindness. Sometimes it came with tears. Gerard began to question, not just his vows, but the purpose of them. Was it not love to protect the boy? Was it not divine to hold him when he wept? One spring night, when the cherry trees bloomed outside the cloister walls, Gerard kissed him. It was brief, it was tender, and it was seen. In the Middle Ages, such acts were not merely condemned, they were criminal. A monk accused of carnal transgression could be whipped, imprisoned, even executed depending on the bishop and the mood of the inquisitors. But this story, tonight, does not end in fire. Instead, something rare happened. The abbot of the monastery, an old man with clouded eyes and many regrets, called Gerard into the garden. He said only this: "What you did was not evil, but it was dangerous, not for the boy, for you. The world does not forgive what it cannot explain. So choose your path again, and choose it carefully." And so, Gerard left. He shed the robes of monkhood and walked quietly from the cloister one summer morning. He became a healer in the countryside. He never took another vow. Some forms of intimacy, you see, had the power to destroy, but sometimes, just sometimes, they opened doors instead of locking them. Sex could kill, or it could free, and the line between the two was often nothing more than a breath. Now, we shall drift again, westward, past hills, past rivers, into France. Here, the story turns once more to queens, to courts, to caution, and to a woman named Isabeau. Her name might not ring in every chronicle, but she was a diplomat's daughter, turned duchess, turned traitor, or so her enemies claimed. Isabeau had a gift, not for seduction, not for charm, but for timing. She knew, somehow, when to enter a room, when to look away, when to let silence speak. And it was that quiet power that let her gain the ear of a king, Charles VI of France, plagued by madness, by delusions, by whispers from ghosts only he could hear. While others trembled, Isabeau watched. She learned, and in time she offered not her body to the king, but her presence. She soothed him in his rages. She calmed him in his storms, and when he could no longer rule, it was she who advised the regents. Behind her velvet sleeves were hands that pulled threads no one else saw. It was not sex that gave her power, but the way others feared she might use it. She lived in a world where any close relationship between a woman and a powerful man was viewed with suspicion, and so she learned to play that suspicion like a flute. She never denied the rumors. She simply let them grow, because sometimes the threat of seduction was more powerful than seduction itself. Let that sink in now, like a candle melting slowly on a polished table. Let your breath be slow, steady, gentle. We are moving closer now to the heart of the fire, to darker tales. But not yet. Let the hush settle first. Close your eyes if they're not closed already. Breathe in, and let go of the day. Let your thoughts drift like pollen in a summer wind. Let the hush of the world fall over you now. Imagine the stars above a great stone castle, the wind curling softly around the turrets and towers, the scent of damp ivy along crumbling battlements. The hearth crackles in the corner. Its warm, golden glow dances on a chamber wall. We are safe inside. And our story, dear listener, continues quietly. Our story now drifts into the realm of nobility and misfortune, of women who held power not with sword or army, but with whispers, reputation, and the secrets they carried in their blood. In the land of Aquitaine, beyond vineyards and blue hills, the queen known as Isolde of the Hawthorn had reigned beside 3 husbands and buried them all. The court whispered that her bed was her battlefield. But was it poison, or was it seduction so potent, so woven with strategy, that it turned marriage into murder? At her wedding feasts, the wine never flowed freely. No kisses were exchanged before witnesses. Each union was sealed not in public passion, but in private suspicion. You see, the queen knew that her beauty was feared, and that fear, she wore it like armor. She was no witch, no sorceress. She simply understood that the right rumor, spread at the right time, was more lethal than any sword. And in a world where alliances meant survival, a noblewoman who lost her husband gained something else entirely: power, autonomy, even land. In Isolde's case, each husband's death enriched her. Her lands grew. Her court thickened with suitors and spies. Her influence expanded like the moon's pull on tides. But it came with danger. On her 3rd widowhood, a priest refused her confession. He said, "Your sins are not secrets. They are songs sung in the marketplace." Still, no charges were brought. For who dares challenge a woman whose fingertips touched 3 noble graves? In private, she wept, not for the men she lost, but for the freedom that came at such a price. For every night she passed alone. She knew that her kiss could build a kingdom, or end a life. But not all women found sorrow in such fates. Let us now turn to another tale. Across the snowy ridges of Bohemia, where wolves howled in thick pine woods, lived a healer named Marketa. She was no queen, but her name was spoken in reverent tones by villagers and soldiers alike. She was said to know the rhythms of the body better than any priest knew the psalms. Midwives visited her to learn. Wives came seeking comfort. Even young knights, trembling with shame or fever, crossed rivers to whisper their troubles beneath her thatched roof. Marketa, a widow for over 2 decades, never remarried, but her home was filled with life, and her touch was considered sacred. She carried no cross, and spoke no oaths, but her knowledge of fever, of bleeding, of conception and protection was revered. It was said she saved more lives through understanding sex than the village doctor with his rusty tools ever could. Her herbs prevented death in childbirth. Her poultices soothed infections. Her words comforted the frightened. And yet, one spring, a new priest arrived. He saw the young wives leaving her cottage with small bags of dried herbs. He heard the laughter of girls who had once been silent and fearful, and he accused her of sorcery, of encouraging sin. Marketa was summoned to the church. Before the congregation, the priest thundered, "This woman perverts the holy union by teaching women how to control what God alone commands." She did not tremble. She replied, "God gives knowledge. I give comfort. I take neither coin nor favor in return." And the people stood with her. The baker's wife rose and said, "She saved my daughter's life in childbirth." A knight stepped forward and declared, "She cured me when I was too ashamed to speak to my own mother." And so the priest left the village, quietly, for Marketa had reminded the world that in the Middle Ages a widow's knowledge was a powerful thing, especially when it protected life instead of ending it. So we see, sex in the Middle Ages was not only a danger when used to seduce kings, but also a source of survival, education, and protection. It could damn a queen. It could save a widow. It could carry you into court, or drag you to the stake. As the hearthlight dims, let your breath soften. The fire crackles lower now. Outside, the moon watches over all who dream, and in that glow, the stories of Isolde and Marketa drift into silence. Their legacies, both shadowed and sacred, remind us that in a time where men ruled with swords, some women ruled with whispers or healing hands. And both, dear listener, were weapons in their own way. Our story now moves deeper into the winding passageways of medieval convents, sheltered sanctuaries that rose like quiet stone islands amidst a storm of worldly desire. Here, sex was not just denied. It was transformed into something more mysterious, sublimated, spiritualized, and sometimes politicized. Let yourself drift back in time. Imagine a cloister garden at dawn. The dew sits quietly upon the edges of rosemary leaves. Somewhere nearby, a bell tolls softly, sending a gentle vibration through the cool morning air. A veil sways from a nun's head as she moves quietly between rose bushes. The petals are so pale they seem to shimmer against her dark habit. She walks in silence, not speaking, only breathing in the hush of holy stillness. This is where we meet Sister Iselda. She has taken her vows, but she has not left the world. In the Middle Ages, the church was not merely a place of faith. It was also a haven for women with few choices. For some, the veil was a true calling. But for many daughters of nobility, entering a convent was a strategy, a way to avoid an unwanted marriage, or to preserve a family's estate by keeping one heir unwed. Iselda's story was both. Born to a once wealthy knight who fell from favor, Iselda was destined for marriage at 14, to a man 3 times her age. She fled instead to the stone refuge of St. Odelia's Abbey, where vows of chastity became not just spiritual acts, but shields against violence, against control. But even here, power followed. Sex did not disappear behind the walls. It wore a new mask. A powerful bishop, drawn to the abbey's influence and its hidden landholdings, began to visit often. Under the guise of confession, he called Iselda to his private chamber in the scriptorium. There, he watched her eyes as she spoke of purity, of temptation, and he tested the veil between authority and desire. In the stillness of that sacred room, lined with scrolls and flickering candlelight, Iselda began to understand something deeper. Her chastity was power, so she wielded it, softly. She never allowed him closer than custom required, but she never turned him away completely. Her words were gentle, her voice low. She spoke of angels and suffering, of longing and sacred duty. She wept, only when he looked away, and slowly, the bishop gave her more than words. He gave her influence, books, resources, land for the abbey's kitchen gardens. Whispers passed among the other sisters that Sister Iselda had some spell over him, but Iselda knew it was not a spell. It was restraint, carefully practiced silence and stillness. The denial of sex became a form of command. She was not the only one. In convents across Europe, the vow of virginity protected women from more than just lust. It shielded them from marriage, childbirth, death in labor. But it also gave them unusual leverage. Abbesses sometimes wielded more power than noble lords. They negotiated with kings. Some managed entire towns, and some, like Iselda, learned to keep powerful men close, without ever letting them cross the final line. But there were dangers. For every nun who ruled wisely, there were others whose vows made them targets. One dark winter evening, another novice, Sister Ale, was found in the sacristy, torn habit, bruised face. No one spoke of it. No one named the priest who had entered drunk, preaching of holiness and purity, before dragging her to the cold stone floor. Ale survived, but she never spoke again. Iselda held her hand in the garden, among the rosemary and sage. She taught her to breathe deeply, to let the world become distant. She taught her silence not as surrender, but as protection. In time, Iselda would become abbess. She would lead with calm and caution, keeping her convent wealthy, safe, and protected by a web of promises, favors, and strategic denials. And still, she wore her vow like armor. For in a time when a woman's body was often a tool of transaction, the renunciation of sex, when chosen and when carefully managed, could be the only path to power, safety, and even peace. But like all weapons in the Middle Ages, it came with risk. A woman who refused could be labeled a heretic, or a witch, or worse. One whispered word, of temptation or sin, could shatter everything. So, Iselda walked lightly. She bowed her head when the bishop visited. She smiled with humility, but never with hunger. And in the silence of the cloister, her strength grew, quiet and unseen. Let your breath slow now. Let the garden fade. The stone walls dissolve. And know that even in the Middle Ages, the absence of sex could be as dangerous, or as powerful, as its pursuit. The glow of the fire is gentle now, and so is the sound of your breath. Let it match the hush of midnight winds in a forest of time-worn tales. Let your body soften, as we continue the quiet unraveling of history's secret passions. Our story now carries us deeper into the lives of medieval spies, noblewomen, and monks who all, knowingly or not, danced at the edge of survival and ruin by the thread of human desire. Tonight, we follow the tale of a woman named Agnes of Artois. She was born not in a castle, but in a dusty priory town. a place brushed by silence, wool markets, and the faint clink of leper bells. Her mother had died at childbirth. Her father, a cobbler, was gruff but honest, and he warned her early. Men will offer you coin, bread, and crowns, but nothing is free if it comes through the body. But Agnes had a mind that swam beyond markets and sermon bells. She noticed things. How knights lingered too long in confession. How abbots blushed when noble widows kissed their rings. She saw that in a world of oaths and iron, it was not always the sword that ruled. It was suggestion, allure, temptation. At 15, she was sent to serve as a linen maid in the household of a French viscount. The manor sat above the lawyer, draped in ivy and filled with murmuring tapestries and echoing shoes on polished wood. But it was not long before Agnes realized her beauty was a currency the steward traded in whispers. She learned quickly, not how to yield, but how to listen. Which knight broke his vows? Which priest drank strong cider at dusk? Which messenger bore more than ink in his satchel? By 17, she was no longer a maid, but a confidant, a ghost in corridors, a pair of calm eyes at a banquet. The Viscount's enemies, one by one, began to make disastrous choices, some exiled, others ruined by scandal. No war horns sounded, no blood spilled, and yet the Viscount's power grew. How? Agnes had become his shadow, and her weapon was not blade or poison, but her lips, her gaze, and the art of withholding truth until the right moment. She was taught to use the silken trap, a method rumored to be used in noble courts from Avignon to Krakow, where a woman would pretend to be seduced, encourage the confessor to speak secrets in passion, then disappear just before dawn, leaving only rumors and ruin behind. Sometimes, those secrets saved the Viscount from ambush. Other times, they brought down trade competitors or jealous dukes. And then Agnes disappeared, not into a grave, but into the higher ranks of courtly service, where women like her worked in veiled silence as heraldesses. These women were not simply mistresses. They were trained to gather intelligence, diffuse feuds, and even poison if the mission turned dark. But not all such women were careful. In the archives of the Benedictine monastery of Saint-Ouen, there is a record of Margot the Flame, a woman of similar gifts who tried to seduce a bishop, only to be discovered and burned as a heretic. They said her red dress smoked even before the fire was lit. The very tool that had given her power, her allure, had become the reason for her death. In a world that feared feminine control, the line between seductress and witch was perilously thin. And so, sex became both sword and noose. But let's turn to a gentler story now, one that drifted quietly through the moors of northern England. There, in the region of Northumbria, lived a healer woman named Edith, who used her body in a different way, not for espionage, but for mercy. You see, in the chill of winter, many poor villagers fell sick. Monks held tight to their leeches and Latin scrolls, but it was Edith who offered warm hands and herbal balm. She had learned the art of lying with the dying, an ancient practice where a healer lay beside a fevered person to warm them with her body and draw out the fever. It was dangerous. If she lay too long, she might fall sick herself. If she failed, she would be accused of using sinful methods, even accused of seduction. But Edith saved dozens, maybe hundreds, of lives. And yet, she too was accused. A travelling friar named Brother Giles reported her to the bishop's seat. "This woman lies with men in heat. She plays God with her flesh," he wrote. But the village rose to defend her. Old men hobbled into the church square. Mothers brought their infants. Even the reeve, whose own son had once been near death, testified to her kindness. And so, for once, sex did not kill. It redeemed. Edith was not punished, but praised. A holy exception. Therein lies the paradox of the medieval world. In one valley, desire was damned. In another, it was divine. Now, listener, as the fire crackles low, as the shadows soften, let your mind rest on the flicker of candlelight against stone walls. Let your heart slow like hooves in snow. And remember this. In the Middle Ages, your desire could lead you to riches, or to ruin, to salvation, or to ash. It all depended on who was watching, and why. Soften your thoughts now. Drift deeper into the hush of this midnight tale, where cobblestone alleys whisper secrets, and tapestries of silk and sin gently sway in candlelight. Our story continues. In a hilltop abbey, where ancient scrolls are kept, and the scribes, cloaked in wool and silence, record not just prayers, but forbidden truths. Far to the north, under cold stars and mist-chilled pines, the Duchy of Ermbrecht flourished for a brief and strange season. There, the Duchess was not a woman of courtly grace, but a battle-widow, Lady Merwin, who had inherited her husband's titles after his death at the hands of his brother. Merwin, tall and solemn-eyed, had been raised in the company of monks, and knew scripture better than she knew her own body. Yet when her lands were threatened, first by claimants, then by raiders, she did something unexpected. She summoned a lover, not for pleasure, not for warmth, but as a weapon. His name was Baruch, a mercenary knight from the Levant, rumored to speak 5 tongues and have taken holy orders, then broken them all. She invited him to her keep as a scribe, tasked with cataloguing her late husband's ledgers. But his true purpose was far more delicate. You see, Lady Merwin's enemies believed her to be chaste, harmless. They expected her to retreat into her keep, to fade into mourning, to be childless and soon replaced. But that winter she became visibly with child, and the whisper of an heir, her heir, sent waves through every hall in the region. Men who once planned her assassination now hesitated. Some offered truce, others sent gifts. No one knew who the father was, and that was the point. Baruch, ever shadow-like, left quietly before the snow melted. He was given no title, no gold, and no place in the story. He had served his purpose. And the Duchess? She never named the child's father. Instead, she commissioned a church bell in the boy's honor, and called him Constantine, the son of salvation. He grew to manhood unaware of the precise nature of his mother's scheme. But it saved her life. It preserved the duchy, and it taught the court a lesson. A womb could be mightier than a sword. Now, let us follow a quieter path, to the lowlands of Flanders, where the guildsmen brewed ale and worked linen under the eyes of old stone churches. Here, in a small weaver's house, lived a girl named Elsk. Her story is not of strategy or power, but of how sex could kill you. Softly, slowly, and legally. At just 15, Elsk was married to a man twice her age, a flax merchant named Dirk. She was sold into the match, as many were, for a barrel of dyed thread and 2 goats. Dirk was not cruel. He was simply indifferent. He expected her duties to include warming his bed, bearing him sons, and keeping his hearth swept. But after their 3rd winter together, Elsk still had no child, no swelling belly, no weeping cradle. Whispers began. In those times, barrenness was often blamed on the woman. A man might seek annulment, or worse, accuse her of witchcraft. And so, Dirk went to the town priest. The priest, an aging scholar who fancied himself a physician, asked invasive questions and examined Elsk with little care for her comfort. His verdict? Her womb was cold, a spiritual diagnosis. And so, she was told to warm it by bathing in goat's milk and lying with her husband under a full moon. It didn't work. Soon, she was forbidden from taking the sacrament. Some neighbors refused to buy her cloth. "The devil knots her womb," they'd mutter. In desperation, Elsk took an herbal concoction from an old midwife. Not to kill, but to quicken. She longed for life in her belly. But the herbs burned her insides instead. She took ill. And when Dirk found the herbs hidden beneath the straw, he called the magistrate. The charge was witchcraft. The punishment was exile or death. But fate, strange and unwound as it is, spared her. For the magistrate's wife, quiet and long-suffering, recognized the signs. She too had taken the herbs, once, long ago. She arranged for Elsk to be banished, but only to a convent by the sea, where midwives served as sisters. There, Elsk healed, not just her body, but her name, for at the convent she was taught not to fear her womb. She learned the names of every herb, the ways to read the body's pulses and moon cycles. She became a midwife, a true one, and though she never bore a child of her own, she delivered hundreds. She was called Mother Elsk by fisherfolk and noblewomen alike. She saved lives with her hands, but she always wore a bracelet of red thread, to remind herself of the danger that once came simply from being a woman with a body. So you see, in the Middle Ages, sex could bless you with heirs, or curse you with suspicion. It could buy you peace, or cost you your breath. But it was never neutral. It was never simple. It was a language, a weapon, a refuge, a game. And in our next tale, we'll drift to a city of stone and secrets, where lovers carved warnings into bathhouse walls, and courtesans once chose who lived, and who quietly vanished. The moon hung low over the thatched rooftops of the cloistered village of Elenvra. Night winds swept gently through the narrow alleys, stirring the faint smell of beeswax and old parchment from the chapel stores, and the last of the candlelight in the priest's window blinked like a tired eye. Beneath that gaze, a gathering was forming in a stone chamber, the kind built to echo secrets. Tonight, we speak in whispers, of women accused, men enraged, and of how fire and flesh were once bound by suspicion. Let your body soften, feel the weight of the blankets around your shoulders, the hush of the room you're in. Let us settle into the stillness as we unfold another chapter where desire could save, or destroy. Our story tonight begins with a woman named Isolde. Isolde, a midwife in her 40th year, had lived quietly on the edge of the village for decades. Known for her steady hands and for whispering prayers into the curls of newborns, she had helped bring life into the world more than any other. Yet one evening, under a sky thick with cloud and rumor, Isolde found herself summoned to the hall of inquiry, accused not of healing, but of seduction. A nobleman's son had fallen ill. His eyes clouded, his tongue swelled, and his mind spiraled into madness. And with it came a confession, or what passed for one. He'd spoken Isolde's name through cracked lips, claiming she'd fed him herbs that turned his thoughts to wicked pleasures, claiming she'd visited him in the night wrapped in nothing but shadow and scent. It was said she had bewitched him into lust so consuming that his soul rebelled and sickened in protest. In truth, the boy had likely eaten spoiled cheese and drunk stagnant water from a cracked well. But in the Middle Ages, truth often bowed to fear. And so, Isolde stood before a tribunal of hooded men, their fingers ink-stained and trembling with imagined righteousness. It was decided she would undergo the judgment of the candle. This ritual, mostly forgotten now, was rooted in both fire and silence. The accused would be asked to light a tall, narrow candle made from virgin wax. If the flame burned steadily for the duration of a single Ave Maria, about 45 seconds, then the woman was said to be untouched by lustful devils. If the flame sputtered, cracked, or extinguished, she was considered guilty, her soul proven impure by heaven's own breath. Isolde, draped in linen and calm as snowfall, was led into the room where the ceremony would take place. The candle stood on a small wooden table. Around her sat monks and friars, some eager, some uneasy, some with their eyes already cast in judgment. She was handed the flint and steel. Her hands, calloused from years of catching life, trembled only slightly as she sparked the flame.
A thin thread of smoke rose, then bloomed into golden light. The Avenue Maria was spoken softly. The monks watched the flame more than the prayer. Their eyes flickered with each movement of air, each sway of wax. A breath, accidental or not, could doom her. In that room, one man's sigh could become another woman's pyre. But the candle held, unmoving, still as the stars above the chapel roof. When the final word of the prayer floated into silence, Isolde turned away, knowing that for this night, at least, she would live. But not unscarred. Because though the candle's judgment saved her life, it could not restore her place in the village. Women whispered behind her back. Husbands grew cautious. Children were pulled away from her shadow. Her knowledge of herbs, once sought with gratitude, was now eyed with suspicion. And so, Isolde chose exile. She packed her belongings into a woolen sack, kissed the lintel of her cottage one last time, and vanished into the morning mist. Some say she found work in a distant abbey as a keeper of bees. Others claim she wandered into the woods and became a wise woman to those too poor or too desperate to fear her. But always, her story lingered, passed in hushed tones around fires, or by mothers reminding daughters, a woman who knows too much, or who is desired too freely, walks the blade's edge between healing and heresy. Let the wind outside carry that thought away, and let yourself drift gently into the night. For even in a world where passion could end at the stake, some flames still burn steady, untouched by fear. Now, as your mind relaxes further, let the candle in Isolde's chamber remain glowing somewhere in your imagination, steady and warm. Its flame, soft and hypnotic, calls you into rest. Breathe in, hold, and let it go.
Soft candlelight flickers gently on an embroidered cloth. The scent of beeswax mingles with the woody perfume of dried herbs hung from a timbered ceiling. In this dim, warm hush, let your eyes grow heavy. Let your breath slow, deep and easy. Outside, a wind slips through the trees, brushing against the shuttered windows. A hearth crackles low and steady, casting shadows that sway like dancers on the walls. You are safe. You are warm. You are not alone in the dark. You are with me now, and we are moving gently into the pages of the past. Our story this evening glides quietly into a chamber where silence is velvet, where secrets bloom like bruises beneath linen sheets. And there, behind a heavy carved door, we find Isolde, barely 16, and sold for a dowry of 7 fat cows, 1 iron ring, and a casket of silver spoons. To marry in the Middle Ages was not always to love. It was often a transaction, a tangle of coin, land, and lineage. For women like Isolde, the ceremony was a passage not into partnership, but into submission. Yet sometimes, submission was only the beginning of a much darker fate. Her groom, Lord Gaultier of Vexen, had seen 3 wives buried before her. One fell down a stone stairwell. One wasted away with female hysteria, the midwife whispered. The last had vanished altogether. Her dowry, however, remained intact in the castle ledgers. Still, Isolde smiled through her veil. She had been taught since girlhood that a woman's body was her duty and her danger. On her wedding night, she was washed in perfumed rainwater and laid atop crimson wool, her long hair braided with rosemary to symbolize remembrance. She remembered nothing of what happened next, only the sensation of being hollowed out, like a harvest gourd with the seeds scraped clean. But Isolde, unlike the wives before her, had been quietly taught a craft. Her grandmother, an old midwife with wrists wrapped in wool, had once leaned close and whispered, "There are herbs, my sweeting, that make men tame as lambs, and herbs that stop your womb from catching." So, from the very first night, Isolde sipped a little bitter tea before bed, brewed from pennyroyal and tansy and the dried seeds of wild carrot. She never swelled with child, though Gaultier came to her chamber often, drunk on cider and something more violent than affection. What he didn't know was that Isolde also carried, stitched into the hem of her shift, a small pouch of dried henbane, meant not to poison, but to confuse. On nights when his cruelty loomed, She would set a bowl of hot wine by the fire, letting the powder melt into it, soft and slow. By the time he reached her, Gaultier would sway and blink, and fall into a stupor where she could slip away, untouched and untouched again. It wasn't love. It wasn't victory. But it was survival. And in a world where sex could bind a woman forever or break her entirely, survival was sacred. But word travels even through stone walls. A maidservant saw her steeping herbs. A steward noticed the untouched wine. And then came the rumour, a curse upon the Lord's bedchamber, that Iselda, sweet-faced and silent, was no innocent dove, but a sorceress sent to sap his strength. The church was summoned. A friar, plump with power and sermons, arrived to investigate. He questioned Iselda. He sniffed her sheets. He listened outside her chamber at night, fingers twisted in his rosary, and when Gaultier's interest in his wife seemed to fade, when his appetite turned to illness, the friar declared her damned. Witch, he called her. Succubus. The punishment for such things was not always fire. Sometimes it was exile, sometimes imprisonment. But for Iselda, it was far more cunning. Her dowry was revoked. The cows returned. The silver spoons melted into chalices. And she was placed under holy guardianship at a nunnery far from her home, where the days were long and the nights longer, and the prayers never stopped. There she was meant to wither, to repent, to forget. But Iselda, taught by her grandmother and seasoned by silence, began again. In the nunnery's gardens she found rue and mugwort. In the kitchen she stole garlic and wine. The other women, too, bore bruises from marriage. They whispered. They shared recipes. And slowly a network of resistance bloomed, not with swords or spells, but with teas and oils, and knowledge passed from one trembling hand to another. They became midwives, these cast-off wives. They healed one another. They protected girls too young to wed. And they taught that the body, though feared, could also be wielded, with care, with wisdom, with a kind of defiance that doesn't shout but simply survives. Sex, for Iselda, had once been a door slammed shut, but now it was a threshold walked with choice. She had not conquered, she had not escaped, but she had endured, and in the Middle Ages that alone could mean triumph. So listen now, as her story fades into candlelight. Hear the rustle of her gown in the wind. Hear the soft scrape of a spade in the herb garden at night. She is not gone. She is only sleeping, somewhere deep in the folds of history. And with her, let yourself drift too. Let go. Let warmth curl around you like a shawl, like her whispered secrets. You are safe. You are at peace. The fire crackles low now, like whispers trading secrets on the stone floor. The candle beside your bed has melted into a little pool of golden wax, flickering faintly like a star that's nearly gone to sleep. Breathe in deeply. Feel how quiet everything has become. The wind outside is tired too, just brushing the shutters softly, as if it's tucking the house in. Let your eyes get heavier now. Just a little more. Our story, gentle listener, moves now to a curious chapter. One folded away in the tattered pages of an old monastic record, half-burned, almost lost. It is known as the tale of the Book of Shadows and Sisters. It began in the monastery town of Ely, cloistered near the marshes where swans glide silently at dawn, and reeds sway like secrets being exchanged. It was a place caught between two worlds, the world of parchment and prayer, and the world of whisper and shadow. Sister Edeline was not like the others. She was quiet, yes, as a nun should be, but there was something in her eyes that hinted at knowledge deeper than the Psalms. She had once been a midwife, it was said, before she gave her life to the church. and with that knowledge came understanding of bodies, of desire, of what people feared in the night. She'd seen too much, and in seeing, she had learned. There was a little book she kept hidden, bound in lambskin, stitched tight with silk thread. The pages were inked in elderberry dye, faint and faded now, but filled with secrets passed down from women who had survived not by sword or coin, but by wisdom of the flesh. The book had no title, no saint's name on its cover, but within it were remedies and warnings, a woman's guide to danger and survival. Love potions, yes, but also defenses. How to make a man forget, how to feign sickness, how to leave no child behind when passion brought consequences. Some pages were dedicated to how desire could control men, others to how it could betray a woman if not wielded carefully. Each entry was signed by another sister, not of the church, but of the invisible kind, women who had learned that their bodies were both temples and traps, that sex, in the Middle Ages, was not just a private act. It was power, and that power was not always kind. The Sisters of Shadow, they were sometimes called, though never allowed. Edeline never used the book for cruelty. She only opened it for those who came in fear, poor girls made pregnant by knights who never meant to return, wives suffering under jealous husbands with fists instead of faith, even younger nuns who found themselves trembling after confession when Father Augustine laid his hands too long upon their shoulders. She gave them quiet answers, never loud, never proud, just pressed herbs into hands, whispered things to memorize, and sent them back into the world with new courage. But secrets are not easy to keep, especially when men are afraid of what women might know. One night, in the dead of winter, Edeline was summoned to tend to a young lord's wife. The girl had bled terribly after her third stillbirth. The lord was angry, screaming that she had been cursed, that her womb was a snake's den. He wanted answers. He wanted healing. He wanted, perhaps, vengeance. Edeline came with her satchel of herbs and prayers. She soothed the girl with warm milk and valerian. She washed the blood from her legs. She murmured old rhymes about fertility and moonlight, and how the womb must be warmed, not feared. But the Lord, watching from the shadows, grew suspicious. Her words did not sound like the priest's. Her hands moved like a healer, but her eyes, they held a knowing that frightened him. He followed her back to the convent. 2 days later, soldiers came with a letter bearing the bishop's seal. They searched every cell. They upturned every straw mattress. And when they found the Book of Shadows hidden in the folds of Edeline's habit trunk, they gasped. The pages glowed like embers in the candlelight, detailed drawings of womanhood, notes in a dozen different hands, phrases written in Latin, Greek, and Old English. It was not a holy book, they said. It was a heresy. And yet, none of the soldiers could bring themselves to touch it. One by one, they looked at the drawings, read the entries, grew pale, grew red. "This book teaches manipulation," said one. "This is sorcery," whispered another. But when they asked Edeline if the book was hers, she only said softly, "It belongs to all of us." They burned it in the courtyard 3 nights later, as snow began to fall. Ash floated into the air like butterflies. Some of the nuns wept. Others stared into the fire with hollow faces. But not Edeline. She stood with her arms crossed and whispered a prayer in a tongue older than Latin. Later that week, 3 nuns were sent away, including her. It was said she died in exile. It was also said she lived for many years with a small group of women in the fens, where they helped other women cross difficult roads. No one truly knows. But some say, in Ely's convent garden, if you dig just deep enough beneath the snowdrops and sage, you might find a single page that escaped the flames. It is soft to the touch, and on it is written, "We write not to sin, but to survive. Let no girl be unarmed." Sex, in the Middle Ages, was not just a matter of pleasure or punishment. It was a weapon. It was a sanctuary. And in the hands of the right sisters, it was a spell. Sleep now, gentle listener. The fire has gone out, but your heart is warm with memory. A hush of silence wraps around the abbey walls, tall and grey beneath a sky the colour of faded wool. Let your shoulders soften. Let your thoughts float gently like rose petals upon still water. Breathe in and out. There, not far from the town's outer fields, beyond the hedgerows and gravelled paths, rests a quiet convent, a sacred space guarded by more than stone and prayer. Our story, this night, finds its way into those candlelit corridors, where a world of secrecy lies just beneath the veil of devotion. The convent of St. Eltha was known for its strict order and unbending vows. The sisters who resided there spoke little, moved softly, and lived lives ruled by rhythm, prayer bells at dawn, vespers by twilight, and silence through the night. And yet, even within cloistered stone, human desire cannot be fully erased. Sister Marit was only 16 when she arrived at St. Eltha, her cheeks still pink with youth, her eyes wide with confusion. Her family had chosen the convent after a nobleman twice her age took an interest in her, an interest that her mother feared would destroy her daughter's honour. Better to be God's bride than a baron's mistress, they whispered. But life behind the convent gates was no simple protection. The nunnery was not merely a house of prayer. It was also a sanctuary for secrets too perilous to be kept in the world beyond. You see, in many such religious houses across medieval Europe, noble families placed their daughters for more than piety. They placed them to hide scandals, a pregnant daughter, a forbidden romance, even illnesses of the body or mind thought to bring shame to a family name. And so the convent became both refuge and prison. Sister Marit came to know the hidden chambers of St. Eltha, the small herbal apothecary tucked beneath the chapel, the dusty parchment records kept in a locked chest, and even the winding stone stair that led to the old bell tower. But the deepest secret she would discover lay beneath the herb cellar, in a space where few dared step. One night, after evening prayers, an older sister, Agnes, beckoned Marit toward the back corridors. Agnes was stern but kind-eyed, her face lined with age and something unreadable. "You've a healer's touch," Agnes murmured, "and a quiet tongue. Come." Marit followed without question, her slippers barely brushing the stone. The trapdoor in the cellar creaked open like a sigh, revealing steps descending into the earth. The smell of damp soil and dried lavender filled the air. Below, a hidden chamber glowed with candlelight. Inside were 3 other sisters, and a girl no older than Marit herself, pale and moaning on a straw mattress. "She's with child," Agnes whispered, "a noble's daughter. Her family cannot keep her. They've brought her here to deliver in silence. We do what we can." Marit blinked in surprise, but didn't speak. She only stepped forward, instinctively taking the girl's hand. This hidden chamber, unknown even to most of the convent, had been used many times before, not just to aid birthing, but to house women who had been abused, abandoned, or made dangerous by what the world called sin. Here, among the supposed sanctity of vows and veils, sex had become a silent sword. For some women, it had ruined their station. For others, it offered protection. A child conceived in silence might be given away to another house or even, rarely, smuggled out and raised by peasants with a purse of coins as thanks. And so Sister Marit was initiated into the nunnery's other calling, not only as servant to God, but as guardian of those whose bodies had been used, betrayed, or punished. Each month, a new face would arrive, some crying, some silent, some unaware of what grew inside them. And in the darkness, beneath sacred hymns, The sisters would whisper stories. "There was once a lady of high birth," Sister Agnes told Morit late one night, "who chose to fall pregnant by a knight rather than be wedded to a cruel merchant. She came to us, and we helped her. She survived because she had this place. And so did her daughter, though she never knew her mother's name." Morit grew strong in her quiet service. Her hands became skilled in laying herbs on swollen bellies, soothing pain with oil, wrapping infants in linens still warm from the hearth. And still she kept silent. Outside the hidden chamber, she spoke only prayers and psalms. But one day, a woman arrived whose story would test the very walls of the convent. She was tall, veiled, and wore the fine cloak of nobility. Her belly was round, and her face pale beneath her cowl. Morit recognized her almost at once. The Lady Isolde, cousin to the king's chamberlain. What could bring her here? The truth was dark. She had been violated by a visiting ambassador, someone too politically powerful to accuse. Her family, ashamed and afraid, had hidden her away rather than risk scandal. And so she came to St. Eltha not to find peace, but to disappear. Isolde gave birth to a boy in the cold of November, her screams muffled by wool stuffed under the door. Morit held the infant first, his tiny cries like music in the stone chamber. He was healthy, perfect, but would never know his mother's name. The child was given to a merchant's widow in the town, one who had lost her own child and prayed for another. Isolde remained in the convent for weeks, speaking little, eyes cast low. And then, one morning, she was gone. A carriage took her at dawn. No one spoke of it again. Morit, now 20, had seen enough to understand the brutal truth of her world. In noble halls and peasant huts alike, sex could be salvation or damnation. It could lead to comfort, love, or ruin. But in the cloistered quiet of St. Eltha, there was something else. There was sanctuary, there was healing, and there was the sacred silence of women who had learned to keep the secrets of others. The candlelight flickers as we step quietly back from the chamber, the scent of sage and warm milk lingering in the air. The nunnery stands still again, its prayers whispered up through the bells. And as night deepens, you may let yourself drift, slowly, gently, like a prayer rising toward the rafters. Let your breathing slow now. Deeper, and deeper still. You are safe and warm, and the world around you has melted away. The flicker of firelight plays gently upon stone walls. The wind outside moans like a distant sea. Here in this place of hushed tones and old secrets, we return again to the Middle Ages. Our story tonight, like a ribbon unfurling across time, brings us to the tale of a woman whose beauty disarmed knights and whose wits defied kings. Her name was Isabel, and though the centuries have nearly forgotten her, her story whispers through the walls of ruined abbeys and moss-draped castles. Isabel was born in Provence, where the lavender fields bloom beneath sun-washed hills. Her mother was a healer, her father a vanished crusader. As a child, Isabel was quiet, watchful. She learned to listen to people's breath, to understand their pain through their eyes, and to speak only when it mattered. When she came of age, her beauty was already legendary. Hair like raven silk, eyes the shade of storm-tossed sea glass, and a voice that felt like honey warming the heart. But Isabel did not trade on beauty alone. She had a gift, not of spells or charms, but of perception. She saw the hunger behind a man's smile, the threat beneath a soft laugh. She understood that in a world ruled by sword and scripture, her body could be both her shield and her blade. And so she walked carefully, until she crossed paths with a Templar, Sir Lucian of Rouen, a man carved from cold marble and iron will. He was sworn to chastity, loyalty, and silence. He had seen horrors in the Holy Land that stripped most men of their mercy. Yet in his presence, Isabel felt something stir. Not fear, but a strange sort of challenge. He came to her cottage wounded, one arm slick with blood, the other gripping a broken relic that glowed faintly in the dark. He had been pursued, he said, by those who called themselves righteous, but who would burn him for secrets he refused to surrender. Isabel healed him. She bathed the wound by candlelight and whispered stories to keep him awake. He watched her silently, eyes never straying, but something in the air thickened between them, something unspoken. Over the nights that followed, their companionship grew. Not lust, at first, but a magnetic reverence. He confessed to her one evening, his voice barely above a whisper, "I have killed for my vows. I have lied in the name of God. But I cannot lie to myself any more." She told him softly, "Desire is not sin, but it is dangerous." He looked into her eyes then and said, "So is truth." And the next morning, soldiers came. They did not knock. They dragged Isabel out by her hair and tore her dress in the square. They accused her of seducing a holy knight, of corrupting a servant of the church. Sir Lucian was already bound, his eyes swollen from interrogation, blood dried upon his temple. And yet, he did not deny her. When asked whether he had broken his sacred oath of chastity, he did not speak. He only looked at Isabel, then lowered his head. Silence, in those times, was as good as a confession. She was to be burned. But the fire never reached her, because Sir Lucian, bound and broken, whispered one final secret to his captors, the location of a hidden letter implicating a powerful abbot in a scheme of treason. In exchange, he asked that Isabel be set free. The church agreed, but Lucian was taken away, and Isabel was cast out. For many years she wandered, cloaked in ash and shame, her name whispered in taverns as a witch who ruined a night. But those who met her eyes too long felt something deeper. Not guilt, but grace. She became a ghost in her own lifetime, working as a scribe in dark corners of monasteries, always hiding, always listening. She never saw Lucian again. But on her deathbed, a messenger arrived. Wrapped in a satchel of cracked leather was a ring. His ring, and inside it, folded like a prayer, a parchment that read, "What they called sin saved my soul, and your touch, Isabel." It was not temptation. It was truth. Some say Isabel died with a smile. Others claim she still walks the ruins of St. Denis, a veiled woman tending broken statues. But either way, she left behind a lesson, that in the Middle Ages, one moment of passion could mean salvation, or fire. Let the fire crackle low now, and breathe, because our story is not yet done. Shoo! Let the world grow quiet around you now. You are safe here, warm, cradled in hush and hush alone. The light is low. The air is still. Outside, a cool breeze sways the grasses beneath the starlit sky. Inside, your breath is slow, your eyes are heavy, and we drift, gently, into the folds of another tale from long ago. Our story tonight carries us to the edge of an old walled town in the late 1300s, where salt hung in the air and secrets wore silk. The widow's name was Anora. She lived alone, in a crooked house between a fishmonger's shed and the alley used by candle boys and errand girls. Her husband, a man of good hands but restless mind, had been lost to a fever the year the frost refused to lift. Now Anora wore her widow's wimple loosely, though still modest, and it was whispered, ever so softly, that her silence had become its own kind of power. Not all widows grieved forever. Some learned how to survive. One morning, with the scent of barley porridge still in her home's beams, Anora opened her shutters and found a parchment pinned to the sill. A wax seal broken. A request. A man of stature, recently returned from Calais, wished to speak to her. She knew the name. Sir Everic de Marney, bastard son of a count, with blood enough for a crest but no claim to its wealth. Still, his robes were fine, his fingers ringed, and he came to her cottage that afternoon, ducking under the eaves with a bouquet of bay leaves and soft-spoken words. He did not ask for comfort. He did not ask for pleasure. He asked for passage. You see, Sir Everic was trapped. Inheritance stolen by older half-brothers, debts owed to men who only smiled with knives in their sleeves. And now he needed legitimacy. A respectable wife, modest in property, untouched by scandal. And Aura narrowed her eyes. And why would a man of your name come to a woman like me? Sir Everic bowed, but only slightly. Because you are not like other women. You know what quiet is worth. You understand how survival works in shadows, not halls. He had learned of her. Her late husband's black market trading. Her knowledge of Latin. Her skill with ledgers. Her loyalty to no one. Sir Everic offered her not just marriage, but a contract, a bargain. She would become his wife in name, attend public suppers, host quiet gatherings. She would help him recover land and title through law. In return, she would gain protection, land of her own, and, should he die, full inheritance of a manor north of the river. It was the kind of deal made only by people who had seen death and decided they'd rather not meet it again. And Aura took 3 days to decide. On the 4th, she lit her hearth with salt and thyme and let him in. The town did not question the match. Widows married often, sometimes for comfort, sometimes for necessity. But there was something in the way Sir Everic held her wrist too tightly in public, and how she never looked directly into his eyes, that made old women lower their voices as they passed. Behind closed doors, the true bargain took shape, and Aura rewrote his ledgers. She trained his steward. She met with aging clerics who still remembered her husband's dealings, and slowly, carefully, she stitched his reputation into something respectable. But power, once held, is rarely shared equally. One night, by the hearth, with wind tapping against the shutters like impatient fingers, Sir Everic leaned too close and whispered, "I no longer need you." And Aura did not flinch. "You needed me long before you realized it," she said, "and you'll keep needing me, right up until the day you die." That night, she did not sleep. She sharpened a quill instead, and wrote a letter sealed in wax the color of dried blood. It went to a woman named Isabel, a scribe and apothecary who lived above the mill. Isabel owed Aura a favor from a time they had both nearly been burned for copying church books without sanction. Within a week, the bishop's courier delivered news to Sir Everic. His birth had been questioned again. Proof had surfaced that he was never legally legitimized, and the barony he tried to reclaim would fall, irrevocably, into another's hands. He turned pale, but Aura only lit a new candle and returned to her ledgers. She had not destroyed him. She had simply reminded him that she could. From then on, their partnership was one of balance. Cold, cautious, necessary. When they walked through the churchyard, their hands never touched. But when people spoke of them, it was always in lowered tones. Aura died many years later, not in that crooked house, but in a manor surrounded by vines, with 2 hounds at her feet and a stack of unread scrolls at her bedside. She left behind no children, only property and silence, and a parchment, buried among her will papers, where she had written, "Power shared through desire is not given, it is loaned, and one must never forget the interest it demands." Let your thoughts drift now, soft and slow. The tale is complete, but your mind can stay curled around its edges. The flicker of firelight on old stones, the whisper of a widow's voice beneath a veil. Our tale returns to a dimly lit scriptorium tucked into the farthest wing of a convent in Ghent, where shadows shifted as the candles trembled and wax ran slow rivers down to the wooden desk. Behind the iron-barred windows, a storm whispered against the stone walls, and inside, a nun dipped her quill into red ink, pigmented not with simple dye, but with powdered cinnabar and clove, a blend only used in manuscripts the outside world would never be allowed to read. Her name was Sister Cecile, and her role was not only that of a scribe, but also that of a secret keeper. The book before her was bound in faded calfskin, and embossed into its surface was a symbol, a rose entangled with thorns, petals folded over a flame. This was the Crimson Book, passed from abbess to abbess, nun to nun, across generations. It held within it hundreds of confessions, whispered to the church by women of every station, queens, prostitutes, midwives, and peasants alike. But it was not a book of sins. It was a book of strategies, of how sex had saved women from death, and sometimes condemned them to it, how it had been weaponized, hidden, feared, revered. Each entry was written in code, a cipher known only to the sisterhood who had sworn to protect it. But tonight, as the storm deepened and the wind clawed at the convent walls, Cecile prepared to break tradition. She had read something new, something terrible. She copied it now, slowly, translating the hidden words into readable script for the first time in centuries. It was the tale of Lady Amara of Béziers, a noblewoman turned traitor, not of her people, but of the ideals she was raised to uphold. Amara had once been wed to a brutal lord, a man who believed control over a woman's body was control over her soul. In that time, he had made an example of her. Public punishments for imagined indiscretions, forced fasting, and nights locked in the cold cellar. But Amara had learned from his cruelty, and when a young Templar came to the city, wet behind the ears and full of the church's fire, she did not seduce him, not at first. She educated him. She taught him about the way women were used as coin in marriage alliances, how widows were made vulnerable in the absence of sons, how nuns who left convents were often blamed for their own rapes. She planted the seed of questioning, and only then, in the shadows of her garden where the yew trees grew, did she lie with him, under moonlight, surrounded by rosemary and lavender, cloaked in secrecy. He believed he had claimed her, but she had planted a deeper fire inside him. He became her sword. With his help, she forged papers of liberation, freed servants, smuggled abused wives to safer lands. But as all things in those times, love, or the semblance of it, turned to danger. When her Templar was caught, he confessed it all under torture. Amara, named in every breath, was dragged through the streets and accused of bewitching him with sex. The bishop gave her one chance. If she confessed and swore off her feminine wiles, she would be spared. But Amara stood tall. She said, "It is not my body that frightens you, it is what I used it to undo." She was burned the next morning. The ash from her pyre was scattered into the convent gardens. And though her body perished, the sisterhood did not forget. Her story became the first entry in the Crimson Book, sealed beneath layers of metaphor, encoded for protection. And now, centuries later, Sister Cecile wept as she copied it out in full. She had recognized the story from the whispers of her own mother, once a noblewoman herself, before she had vanished into the monastic life. Could it have been Amara's lineage she carried? Cecile placed the completed page back into the book, kissed it once, then slid it into a hidden chamber beneath the altar. The next day, she would disappear. Some say she fled north, carrying copies of the entries across the sea, to monasteries in Iceland and distant corners of Christendom. Others claim she was buried beneath the convent, beside the dried yew tree that had never bloomed again. But the book survived, and those who found its pages, fragments tucked in candlesticks, sewn into hems of dresses, or slipped beneath floorboards, knew it for what it was, a guide not to sin, but to survival. Tonight, as you rest your head upon your pillow, imagine the pages of that secret book fluttering in the candlelight. Imagine the red ink still wet, the whispers of thousands of women echoing through time, not screaming, not crying, but speaking, calmly, with power. And as you slip deeper into rest, know this: their stories are not lost. They are only waiting to be remembered. Sleep now, beneath the cloak of secrets. Breathe gently, as if your breath might turn the page of a forgotten history, and let the hush of ancient voices carry you softly toward dreams. Let yourself drift now, deeper into the hush of the hour, where the moon sails high and the earth rests beneath its pearled glow. You are safe here, wrapped in the folds of time, cradled by the story that slowly, gently comes to its end. Feel the softness of sleep pressing at the edges of your thoughts. And breathe. Our tale, dear listener, now returns to the flickering chamber where it began, not far from the whispering fields and crumbling abbey walls, where scrolls were once inked in secrecy, and silk sheets rustled with hidden intentions. By the twilight of the medieval age, the world had changed. Kingdoms had risen and fallen, popes crowned and dethroned, lovers burned and crowned in gold alike. But one thing had never changed: the whispered knowledge that the body could be both key and blade, offering salvation or drawing ruin. In Paris, an older Madeline sat quietly before a fire, her face silvered with time. Once, her beauty had shaken kings and terrified confessors. Now, she stirred her tea slowly, staring into the embers as though they were visions of the past. She had survived it all: courts, betrayals, secrets written in flesh and silk and silence. A knock came at the door. Her maid opened it. A messenger stood there, bearing not parchment or seal, but a face she had not seen in decades. It was Brother Tomas. He was no longer a brother, nor cloaked in robes of any church. His hair had thinned, and his face wore the furrows of quiet battles and hidden choices. And yet, when their eyes met, something unspoken curled between them, tender, wordless, whole. He sat beside her in the firelight. They said little, for some reunions require no speech. His hands, once used to ink scripture and touch forbidden parchment, now trembled slightly as he reached out for hers. "You taught me," he murmured, "that love, true love, is never a sin when it redeems." She nodded. "And you taught me," she whispered, "that some sins are worth the risk if they save a soul." In the quiet that followed, the fire crackled softly, and beyond the window, snow had begun to fall. History would forget them. The world would go on chasing kings and chronicling wars. But between them, two hearts burned by belief and bound by the warmth of something greater. A different kind of history had been written, one that no sword could destroy, one that no bishop could erase. In their final years, they lived not as legends, but as keepers of gentler truths. They taught young minds, not with sermons or seduction, but with stories. Stories of queens and courtesans, nuns and knights, of how the body could be used not just to tempt or to take, but to save, to shelter, to change the fate of an entire age. And now, as you settle deeper under your blanket of dreams, know that the echoes of their lives still linger, in the way candles flicker when someone remembers, in the hush of libraries that hold forgotten names, in the warmth between two people who dare to love without permission. So breathe with me, slowly, in and out. Let the world of stone towers and velvet chambers fade behind you. Let the crackling fire in your mind's hearth die down, ember by ember. Let the wind outside grow still. You have walked with queens and spies, with widows and scribes. You have seen how a kiss could be a weapon, how a body could be a map. But now all is quiet. Sleep, dear traveler, and know that even in the darkest centuries, light lived on, in love, in longing, and in the soft places where history dared not look. Good night, and may your dreams remember what the world has forgotten.